This video is one of a few which I've made, which focuses on Jesus preaching in the temple during Holy Week. Holy Week is the time from Jesus entering Jerusalem on the donkey, in accordance with Zechariah chapter 9 verse 9, the prophecy of the Messiah entering Jerusalem, and of course it ends with the glorious resurrection. On the Wednesday before Passover, that is before Jesus institutes the priesthood, the Catholic priesthood, at the Last Supper, on the Wednesday he's in the temple preaching. And I'm going to make this video because it's instructive to see how the scribes and Pharisees developed over the centuries prior to Jesus coming to earth, and also particularly instructive for us in the West who've seen our nations go into what would seem to be a terminal decline despite economic growth, despite ever increasing sophistication of arms. It's clear that something is very much amiss. Well, by reading this statement of Jesus, this sermon of Jesus, one can see why we're in decline and what we need to do to get out of it. Whether we will or not is another matter, but the instruction from heaven is quite clear. So this is the vision of the 2nd of April 1947. The apostles, disciples and crowd follow him in a compact group while he goes back again to the place at the first town walls, a spot almost sheltered by the wall of the temple enclosure, where it is not so warm in this very sultry day. As the ground has been roughened by the hooves of animals and is strewn with the stones used by merchants and money changers to fasten their enclosures and tents, there are no rabbis of Israel there, who did not mind allowing a market to be held in the temple, but are disgusted at walking in their sandals with the footprints of quadrupeds, which were cleared out from there a few days previously, have been badly cancelled. Just to pause for a moment, that's, I think, a reference to Jesus when he engages in clearing out the money changers from the temple, as recorded in Matthew, Mark and Luke. I just want to say that there's no contradiction with St. John there, who records the clearing out of the money changers at the beginning of Jesus' ministry, or near the beginning, because there is this that happens in Holy Week is the second clearing out of the money changers from the temple. The first one is recorded by St. John. The second one is reported by Matthew, Mark and Luke. So to continue, contrasting the disgust of the Pharisees who would not, or the priests who would not actually go anywhere near where all these animals had been, Jesus is not disgusted and he takes his shelter there, surrounded by a large crowd of listeners. But before speaking, he calls the apostles to come close to him and says to them, "Come and listen carefully. Yesterday, you wanted to know many of the things that I will tell you today, and that I mentioned vaguely yesterday when we were resting in Joseph's kitchen garden." I'm assuming that's a reference to Joseph of Arimathea's kitchen garden. If I were to flip back, I'd find out, but there are so many Josephs in Maria Valtorta's work, I do lose track of who is who. Jesus continues, "So pay attention, because they are important lessons for everybody, and for you in particular, as you are my ministers and continuators. Listen, scribes and Pharisees sat on Moses' chair at the right moment. They were sad days for our fatherland. Once the exile in Babylonia was over, and the nation had been restored through Cyrus's magnanimity, the leaders of the people felt it necessary to restore also the cult and the knowledge of the law. Because woe to that people that does not possess them for its defence, guide and support against the most powerful enemies of a nation, which are the immorality of the citizens, rebellion against leaders, disunion amongst classes and parties, the sins against God and one's neighbour, irreligiousness, which are all disaggregating elements in themselves, and because of the punishments they provoke from heaven." Just to pause there. Notice that Jesus is not just talking about Israel there. He says, woe to a people Woe to that people that does not possess them, which is the cult and the knowledge of the law. And he says, these are the most powerful enemies of a nation. So it applies to us, any nation. And that means failing to possess and practice right religion would mean the downfall of a nation. And we can reflect that entire West as effectively a Catholic civilization. All of it springs from Catholicism. It may be mediated via Protestantism, as in case, say in the case of the United States, directly by Catholicism in the case of France and England for 1,000 years before the ruling class with their king decided to usurp the people's rights. But this is fundamentally a Catholic civilization from Australia to Canada, down to when you had the colonies in Africa. It's all Catholic. And so if you abandon the Catholic faith in its teaching or in its practice, ruin can only come upon that civilization, because its foundations will be destroyed. There may be other civilizations out there, but who wants to live in an Islamic civilization or a communist Chinese civilization? Nobody wants to live in those. That's why everybody comes here. Because degenerate though it is better than anything that there has ever been on earth. So to continue with Jesus' words. So scribes or doctors of the law arose to teach the people who spoke the Chaldean language, the heritage of the sore and weary exile, and thus could no longer understand the scriptures written in pure Hebrew. They arose to help the priests, insufficient in number, to fulfill the task of teaching the crowds. Such laity, learned and devoted to honouring the Lord, by taking the knowledge of God to men and leading men to God, had its reason for existence, and it did also some good. Because, all of you must bear this in mind, also those things that through human weakness later degenerate, as it happened to this one that became corrupt in the course of time, always have something good, and at least an initial reason for existence, whereby the Most High allows them to arise and last until, the measure of degeneration being full, the Most High disperses them. Then the other sect of the Pharisees arose from the transformation of the Hasidians, formed to support the law of Moses and the spirit of independence of our people by means of the most rigid morals and the strictest obedience, when the Hellenistic party that had arisen because of the pressure and seductions that had begun in the days of Antiochus Epiphanes, and that soon changed into persecutions against those who did not yield to the pressure of the shrewd king, who more than on his arms relied upon the breakup of the faith in hearts in order to rule over our fatherland, was trying to make us slaves. Remember also this: be more afraid of easy alliances and of the blandishments of a foreigner than of his legions. And just to pause there for a moment, the point that Jesus is making about Antiochus Epiphanes is that all you need to do is to make a person abandon their faith. You don't have to use violence and thuggery to do that. Just seduce them away from the true religion, and then you have your conquest. So just to repeat what Jesus was saying, remember also this: be more afraid of easy alliances and of the blandishments of a foreigner than of his legions. Because while if you are faithful to the laws of God and of your fatherland, you will win, even if you're surrounded by mighty armies. If instead you're corrupted by the subtle poison given as an inebriating honey by the stranger, who has made his plans concerning you. God will abandon you because of your sins, and you will be defeated and subjected, even if your false ally does not wage a bloody battle with you. Woe to him who is not as vigilant as a sentry and does not repel the subtle snare of a false, shrewd neighbour, or ally, or conqueror, who begins his domination over individuals, weakening their hearts and corrupting them with usages and habits that are not ours and are not holy, and consequently make us unpleasant to the Lord. Woe! You must remember the consequences brought about to our fatherland by the fact that some of her children adopted usages and habits of a foreigner to ingratiate themselves with him and enjoy favours. It is a good thing to be charitable with everybody, also with people who are not of our faith, who have not our usages, and who have harmed us through the ages. But our love for these people, who are always our neighbour, must never make us disown the law of God and of our fatherland for some premeditated benefit extorted from our neighbours. No. Foreigners despise those who are so servile as to disown the holiest things of their fatherland. It is not by denying one's father and mother, God and fatherland, that one achieves respect and freedom. I shall stop there because Jesus does carry on, but it's a very long sermon, as are many that he's giving during this period. But we can see there's a contemporary relevance for those in the West who are, firstly we can go back to the Protestant Reformation in England or other parts of Europe. But we can see that the abandonment of what was pleasing to God, that is the Catholic faith, and replacing it by a counterfeit Christianity, meant that God's blessing was lifted from this nation. One might say, no, because Britain became a great world empire and was the father of the Industrial Revolution. This is all true, but God doesn't really care about great world empires if they're not advancing Christianity, and nor does he care about the Industrial Revolution. We must remember that when the church was overthrown in this country by Henry VIII, but also those who were with him who wanted to benefit from stealing church property, church lands and so on, the poor law had to be introduced because the English people were thoroughly impoverished. And that poor law was a failure. And so we ended up with a new poor law. But this is a sign that England was sick, that its people, which had turned from God, eventually they tried not to initially, but they gave in and they turned from God. And so they ended up an impoverished English people. And William Cobbett, in his Rural Rides, wrote about this, that the English man was more prosperous, more at peace, when the Catholic Church was the religion of England than subsequently. And Cobbett was not a Catholic. So that's the fundamental fruit of the Reformation. We need not speak about the fact that it led to civil war and regicide. But we can come forward instead, without dwelling on that, to the contemporary period. Now we have occupiers of the nation who are principally the atheists, of whoever they are composed, who are governing the direction of national life. The politicians at Westminster just follow what winds are blowing. They're not creators of the culture. So we can't say that they're to blame, except insofar as they're utter cowards and seek their interests by doing what they think will get them votes and what will not cause them to be attacked. That's the British Parliament. But with the change of the culture by those who control the culture, we move further and further away even from the counterfeit Christianity that is Anglicanism. Would that we could go back to that 16th century Anglicanism, then the country would be in a far greater state of health than it is now. But we're not going back to that, because counterfeit Christianity is by its nature self-destructive and inclined to wither away. Only the religion established by Christ can thrive, and that is Catholicism. So that's the state of England with respect to the Anglican faith and as we are today. But then we can look at another feature, a false religion, which is in Britain, which is called Islam. Not native to these islands, but is present here in large numbers because of mass immigration. That should be an opportunity for the Catholic Church, not a threat. In fact, we could say, and it isn't perverse to say this, we'd want pagans to come here from all over the world, because it's only here, governed by law, however degenerate that law has become, only here governed by law that you can convert Muslims to the true faith, because over in their lands they're liable to be killed because of their barbaric system and barbaric way of thinking and barbaric legal system which they get from their God. Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre, when he was head of the Holy Ghost Fathers, he says in one of his writings that Muslims, when he was in Africa, when they would come to him and say they wanted to convert to Catholicism, he would say, don't do it here. Go to France, convert there. There you'll be safe. And that was true back in the 50s and 60s. But of course, France is changing in a massive way. Nonetheless, the point is that given the way the world is, if people come here who are not Christians, we can have a better opportunity to convert them. And huge numbers do convert. I mean, in Iran, of course, there's a homegrown mass conversion to Christianity. But that isn't going on yet in all the other Muslim nations. It will in due course. But we should see mass immigration of non-Christians as an opportunity. The reason it's not an opportunity is because we're not taking the opportunity. And the reason we're not taking the opportunity is because we're navel-gazing and messing about with heresy within our ranks. While German bishops talk about allowing the unspeakable things to be allowed in Catholicism, Germany is full of heathens who could be evangelized and brought to the Catholic faith. And so it is all over the Western world. But when we have readings from the Quran in our churches, or if we seek to placate the Muslims by saying, oh yes, Muhammad is a prophet for you, if we ever say that, or if we give any credence to the doctrines of a false religion, and not just Islam, any false religion, then we are doing no favours to those people. And Jesus says that we must be very careful not to take that approach with foreigners. It says here, foreigners despise those who are so servile as to disown the holiest things of their fatherland. It is not by denying one's father and mother, God and fatherland, that one achieves respect and freedom. In saying that Allah is God, we are despising God. In saying that through Islam or Hinduism or Buddhism or whatever it is, there's a way to God, we are despising God, who said that the only way to salvation is through Jesus. Jesus, God the Son, said this. So we must be very, very wary of ecumenism. Basically, we can be ecumenical amongst Christians to a degree, but then only a limited degree, because although Protestants are Christians, they are not fully Christian. They lack what they disposed of when they left the Catholic faith. And there's no point beating around the bush. Their religion is not pleasing to God. They themselves can be pleasing to God, Make absolutely no mistake about that. But their religion is displeasing to God because it is false, man-made religion, a distortion of the true religion. Outside of Christianity, there's nothing that we can speak of that's pleasing to God about those religions. But we can say that those individuals in those false religions can be pleasing to God because they do what they can. And doing what you can is pleasing to God. And so let us pray for a renewal of Catholicism in the West, because it's the only thing that's ever saved Europe from its external enemies. The Byzantine religion, when it separated from Catholicism, known as Orthodoxy, did not save that from Islam. But Catholicism not only saved Europe from Islam, but vanquished Islam. And Catholicism can vanquish all the enemies of the West, all the enemies of true civilization. And the principal enemy is not Islam. The principal enemy is A, within ourselves, those who seek to promote heresy and gross immorality within the Catholic faith, and those who are of this civilization but are promoting, who are in leadership positions in this civilization and are pushing and pushing to remove us further and further away from good morals, never mind a belief in God, but are seeking to turn this civilization into the civilization of hell, which is pleasing to them, but is going to be a disaster for the human beings who live here in this civilization, just as the Protestant religion was a disaster for the English people in these islands. So blessed be God forever.